Hi, my name is Ginny, also known as Two-Thirds Lotus, and this clip is part of my series analyzing the Essential Bukowski, edited by Abel DeBrito. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as it was streamed on Twitch, with all the imperfections and tangents of a live stream. If you want to learn more or catch me live, make sure to check out the description, otherwise enjoy the incredible work of Charles Bukowski. Good one. We're going to jump into this Bukowski. And we're going to start by reading this poem 2 times. And then we're going to analyze it and pull out what this crazy man might be trying to tell us about the world through his equally crazy art. Let's get into it. A Poem is a City by Charles Bukowski. A poem is a city filled with streets and sewers, filled with saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, filled with banality and booze, filled with rain and thunder and periods of drought. A poem is a city at war. A poem is a city asking a clock why. A poem is a city burning. A poem is a city under guns. It's barber shops filled with cynical drunks. A poem is a city where God rides naked through the streets like Lady Godiva, where dogs bark at night and chase away the flag. A poem is a city of poets, most of them quite similar and envious and bitter. A poem is this city now, 50 miles from nowhere. 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes. No police, no lovers walking the streets. This poem, this city, closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, mournful without tears, aging without pity. The hard rock mountains, the ocean like a lavender flame, a moon destitute of greatness. A small music from broken windows. A poem is a city. A poem is a nation. A poem is the world. And now I stick this under glass for the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny. And night is elsewhere, and faint gray ladies stand in line. Dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows as small men rant at things they cannot do. Poem is a City by Charles Bukowski. A little longer. Lots. Very dense. Very dense poem. I mean, this is, I would say, fairly characteristic of Bukowski. And, wow. I like this poem on first look, I would say. Not necessarily because it's a new idea, right? That poetry is something full of life and many lives, but the way he describes life within it. Chase away the flag, because dogs be barking. Woof woof. They do. Yeah, lots of very, interesting, striking lines happening here. The chasing away the flag. I really liked, things like no police, no lovers walking the streets, aging without pity, filled with rain and thunder and periods of drought. A poem is a city at war. A clock asking why, right? These are very, I would say, strong metaphors, right? And we talk about metaphor a lot, and one which number is this? In the series of Bukowski, I think it's 17 that we've done. But the interesting thing is, oftentimes we as writers, we like to stick to a few metaphors, right? We read Stylish Fail's poem, one metaphor throughout, Let On. That was a great poem. Sometimes we do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but to go through and put in a new metaphor every line, basically, is doing something special, right? And there's not many things which you can connect metaphor to in that way, right? Because something has to be so broad as to relate to everything, which I think makes poetry one of like the perfect candidates for a style like this, because, well, we use poetry to relate to everything, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me intuitively as a way to write this poem, right? You don't get the imagery of the dogs. We'll get back to that and talk about each of the specific things. I should write for chat for anyone who comes in. We are currently reading a poem. A poem is a city by Charles Bukowski. The Big B. Pin. Did not pin. I will pin in here. There we go. What a work. So, let's start to make some sense of this, because this might be a tough poem to make sense of, because it is so broad. It's almost saying that everything is here, right? Which is gonna be a tall ask of a poet and a poem, to describe everything and to do it well. And we're gonna decide whether he's missing things, what he might be saying. And I'm gonna read it again, because to engage with a poem properly, you must be suitably insane. And insanity is the action of doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So, if I want to engage with a poem and the insanity of poetry, all I must do is continue reading over and over again, and it will drive me to insanity, and I will understand the existence of the poet. A poem is a city. A poem is filled with streets and sewers, filled with saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, filled with banality and booze, filled with rain and thunder and periods of drought. A poem is a city at war. A poem is a city asking a clock why. A poem is a city burning. A poem is a city under guns. Its barbershops filled with cynical drunks. A poem is a city where God rides naked through the streets like Lady Godiva, where dogs bark at night and chase away the flag. A poem is a city of poets. Most of them quite similar and envious and bitter. A poem is this city, now 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes. No police, no lovers walking the streets. This poem, this city closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, mournful without tears, aging without pity. The hard rock mountains, the ocean like a lavender flame, a moon destitute of greatness, a small music from broken windows. A poem is a city. A poem is a nation. A poem is the world. And now I stick this under glass for the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny. See, editors are mad because they read things over and over. And night is elsewhere, and faint gray ladies stand in line. Dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows, as small men rant at things they cannot do. For those who don't know, Lady Godiva was forced to ride a horse through the street naked. But because she was so loved, nobody looked. Besides Tom who peeped? That's where that comes from? Yeah, that's crazy. That's where Peeping Tom comes from. Is that like actually... Last part you didn't know. Huh. Oh. Wait, that makes that line really, really cool. Right? Like looking away from God. If it's like Lady Godiva, right? Also God Godiva. It's just very, very like well word played there. But that's that's a brilliant metaphor actually. But just saw on Wiki. Well, Wikipedia I think is generally reputable for information, particularly things that are older or like those stories or certain historical things, right? The issue is just using his Wikipedia academically. I think it just gets a bad rap for being quite a useful resource. I'm a massive fan of Wikipedia, and I think you can learn a lot, like literally just on the pages of Wikipedia. I've learned some amount of math from Wikipedia. I've learned a lot of ideas and concepts and about things I didn't know. Earlier today, I was writing a poem about, or inspired by astrology. It was called Sagittarius Damned. And I was on Wikipedia because I don't know that much about astrology, but I liked the title. And I just knew I needed to write a poem called Sagittarius Damned and put it on my threads. But it's more of a TIL. Wanted to double check I wasn't misremembering. Gotcha. It's interesting. So, I have a question. Since there are lots of really fun and exciting parts of this poem, where do y'all want to start? Alright? Enjoyed limited moderation today. Gotta go to Walmart because they didn't deliver your frame. No worries. There's no mod. Y'all are free to misbehave. Anywhere y'all want to start? We talked about the dogs and the flags. I think that's an interesting line. Anything that sticks out, words that we like, starting places. Just leave it to you all since there's so much, and I think there's so many directions we can go with this, right? Literally just like one word in the poem. As I eat. A lot of alcohol references. We can talk about alcohol and cigarettes and Bukowski and cities. Sure. So, I like that. Maybe we can categorize some of these ideas. We have so many metaphors that it might get, we don't want to... You think you can guess his lifestyle? That was his lifestyle. I think we can categorize these, right? I don't think we need to go through and say, how is a poem like a city with a saint? How is a poem like a city with a hero, with a beggar, with a madman? It probably talks more broadly than that, right? And it might be useful, at least for the sake of time, to take broader ideas, or take specific ideas, broaden them into categories so that we end up being able to parse through them better. This is a good strategy, right? When things are complex, when there's a lot going on. And the 4 lines starting with a poem is a city. Yeah, I think, like, interesting. I think we'll find many different ways to categorize things, right? So, and it's abandoned right after. It is. There are so many things going on in this poem. But let's start with Bukowski and alcohol, because, well, it's Charles. So, banality and booze. Cynical drunks. Quite similar, envious and bitter. 9, okay. A poem is this city now, 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning. The taste of liquor and cigarettes. I have an idea with that. And then there was some on the other side maybe as well. No. Just those three. Right. These are important. I want to... Sure. So that's one category that we have. We also have... The poem is a city and the things inside the city, right? Which is roughly... So, I divide this into sections, is what I'll do. Because we have the beginning, where we say, a poem is a city. And that is this. Bukowski does this a lot. I'm starting to notice as I read more of him. He will start with one idea, really commit to it for about half the poem, and then he'll usually shift gears and juxtapose it against something similar, but not quite the same. Different enough you can notice, but also similar enough that you cannot notice, right? Because he switches from a poem is a city to a poem is this city now, and then talks about an actual scene in front of him, right? Which makes these things probably separate, and we might look at them separately, right? So, Bukowski has strong associations, regardless, with poetry and, like, alcohol and cigarettes, right? This is something he does. He finds the idea of drunkenness to be very glamorous. This is his take, not mine, Twitch community guidelines. But Bukowski thinks being a drunk is sort of a wonderful thing. And I think, so he's from LA. Bukowski lived in the big Los Angeles in California, and lived this life. And some of this, I think the alcohol and all of that, is him talking literally about how poetry right, his life is reflected by poetry, and poetry reflects his life, that he is in this city, and poetry has many of the same elements, and he's inspired by it. So this, and this is evidenced probably by his inserting of alcoholism and things that he sees in cities. I would say anytime he talks about, you know, also like beggars and madmen, talking about, you know, lovers and these things. These are very much something that Bukowski relates to himself. That romance, right? But the city is not just that, right? It's many things. So I don't find it too worth it to dig in maybe perhaps to why Bukowski thinks a city is like these things, because he also thinks that a city is like, or is filled with banality, right? He forces these associations. This is a topic we've not talked about as a lesson on stream in poetry. And it's a concept. We're going to maybe use more space on this backside. And we're going to talk about forced association. This is a very powerful tool that we have in poetry, which is very counterintuitive as to some poets. Forced association. Because this is very much not how some poets write. But this is basically, rather than rather than taking an idea, or maybe taking something we see, some poets are observers of the world. Mary Oliver is constantly a foil to Bukowski that I talk about, mostly because she's the only other only other poet I've read very much of. But she observes the world, and she writes about it, and she writes its beauty. And the associations are things that she sees. She doesn't force any of that into her poetry. On the other hand, forced association, basically, sorry about the shadow here, is taking something, let's say a poem, and putting it with another word, and saying these things are like each other, right? Forcing the association. You take a poem, and you make it like a city, and you bend the world to your words, instead of adapting your words to the world. And this can go extremely, extremely far, because then you can play with metaphors so much more freely. You can say, blank thing is like this thing, and you're gonna listen to me, and you're gonna see why, and I'm gonna make this association for you. I think this is where a lot of the most creative metaphor comes from, is just forcing it, which is sort of counterintuitive, right? Because, like I said, I think it describes a sort of two ethoses, right? So, ethos just being like a sort of set of ideas that govern things, right? So, we have an ethos in poetry of being an observer, right? And we have another ethos of being a creator. One, you sit and let the world play out in front of you, and you describe it. One, you go in and make art in the world. Bukowski normally is in this camp, and he very much does this in this poem. And it's a very hard gap to bridge. Of course, the creator has to observe in some sense. They have to understand the world to be able to put ideas into it. No one is a pure observer, or they're not actually creating art. But it's not so much the act of creation as, of the poem, but it's the creation of ideas and, spinning things into existence within your work. So we'll call this more of a Mary Oliver, right? Not just to sort poets, but it's maybe one way we can look at these things. And, normally stuff like this, noticing these things, don't necessarily help us as poets, but they can allow us to understand things in a more direct way and find new tools. Maybe I want to write a poem that's more observational like Mary Oliver, and I can investigate ways to do that and improve in my art, or I can do a poem that's more, maybe generative is a better word, create ideas in the world like Bukowski. And I think that's a good way to approach poets, is you look at how they do something, and to try to figure out what is the underlying ethos of what this poet is doing, and now let me try to go replicate that to learn something new in my art, right? These are ways to do things. Him being from LA explains so much about Bukowski. Yeah, it does. It does. I think the banality is not a negative for him per se. He's someone who appreciates small, grimy, banal things. That is very true. That is very true, and I think the poem itself evidences that. But I do think, he also talks about a life without booze as a boring and banal one. And I think banal is maybe different than small, unnoticed, and mundane, where Bukowski loves to write about that. But I think the banal is something that maybe has no value to someone like Bukowski. I've been I've been trying my best to not run an ad break, but I should drink some water and should stretch a little bit. So I'm gonna throw up a self-care ad break. If you all I recommend should do some self-care yourselves for a moment, and I'll be back with you in a couple minutes, and we can jump back into that discussion of banality. Oh, this is gonna be a long one. This is gonna be a long one. New submission from Devil? It's every day. Caliber. High caliber. High caliber. High caliber. Welcome. I don't know if you have an ad right now, but if you don't, welcome. Currently drinking water. Callie wrote a poem. This is good. When you all write poems, it gives me hope for the world. Hope for myself. Will we get to read it? That is a great question. I do like me a high caliber poem. I feel like it's been a while. I feel like we're kind of due. You know? No pressure. No pressure at all. Submission is a difficult thing, and I will not pressure you into it at all. About straw men. And dropping phones. And fume coming out from ears. And traffic. That sounds like a banger. High caliber. So many cool things. Cool images. Welcome back. We are still reading A Poem is a City. We're talking about banality. But I think the point, it maybe speaks to your point, Stylish Fail. So you said, well, I think Bukowski likes the banal. It's not a boring thing to him because the mundane, the things of every day, the small gritty things, the life of a city, a pigeon, which he writes about in another poem, is something he can write about, right? In this way, banality maybe becomes interesting to him, and that's quite a good lesson to learn, perhaps. But I think it speaks to this poem because the poem talks about how, poetry, cities have everything, and they have this great breadth, and also that in many ways, like we'll see as we dig into some more of these metaphors, they contradict themselves, right? A city is a very contradictory thing, I think. A city is filled with, simultaneously, saints and heroes, and yet it is also filled with beggars and madmen, right? It is filled with streets and sewers. The difference between the banal and the mundane, I mean, it's hard to say for sure, because we all use these words differently, and it's all an approximation. But if we look definitionally, I see banal as completely lacking sort of any artistic, intellectual, aesthetic value, right? Like a gray wall, right? Banal. So lacking in originality as to be obvious and boring. So maybe even worse than being boring, being like almost boring to the point of cliche, synonyms, platitudinous, vapid, right? Empty of meaning. Where mundane to me, I have my own sort of understanding of the word of mundane, right? Which, it is generally synonymous, right? Lacking interest or excitement, dull. But there's also another definition of this earthly world, rather than a heavenly or spiritual one, which is a more religious definition. But I like this in a sense, because I talk about the mundane a lot, and that's sort of what I talk about. That which is in our lives, which is regular and just part of our existence that we might overlook, which can very much be, something to take excitement from. Whereas I would say banal banal is an American suburb, which is like almost this parody of itself in how overwhelmingly like sprawling and disgusting and boring and this like vapid caricature of existence. I think the suburbs are banal. I think, though, that nature is mundane, or that even a city can be mundane. Things that are maybe in themselves not all that interesting at face, but have some amount of underlying aesthetic that can be drawn from them, which is really interesting. It makes that distinction sort of require an observer, which makes the banality, which makes the mundanity or the decision between the two not something inherent at all, right? So, finished another poem that wasn't the one I mentioned in chat. Dude, Drowning Devil, very awesome. Writing good. High Caliber, you say what? Sajfil, does that maybe answer your question? I at least, that's my difference of banal and mundane. You agree? Okay. Very awesome, very awesome. So these are the differences. And I like stories that are mundane. I think the mundane is pastoral. The mundane is, in a sense, like Mozart's Symphony Number 3. The Pastoral Symphony. It is rolling hills. There is sort of little there, but there is beauty. I'm happy you have money now. You see High Caliber? This is the fundamental force of capitalism, and I think you're doing it very well. That joy is derived from money and money only. Artistic value, again, only money. The only good poem is one that makes money, and this is how you should be living your life. So I'm very, very happy to read that, High Caliber. It's so hard to I love trying to say that stuff with a straight face. And I can never quite do it. I always laugh at the end. Pastoralism is a very romantic, idealized idea. Yeah, but I think it's a romanticization of the mundane, right? Where our romanticization of the banal would be I think it's a relation to the mundane, right? Pastoralism is value from the mundane. If I had to describe something as value or aesthetic pleasure in the banal, it would be something more brutalist to me, right? Concrete slabs of buildings, cubes next to each other, right? This is how I see the banal. Scarlet Violet, thank you for the follow. Welcome in. Pastoralism is very linked to a capital R romantic idea of nature. Yes. Which is not very mundane. That's true. I think you have a point there. You're about to minor in creative writing. That's awesome, High Caliber. This is probably good. Don't let anyone tell you what to write, though. Don't be an MFA, bitch. Write your words and teach your teachers. I don't know if that makes sense. I think you're probably right on pastoralism / fail. As a village girl, most pastoralism is fantasy. Yeah. I mean, and my vision on that, maybe, is that because pastoralism is an overblowing, a romantic overblowing of something that is mundane, right? Frolic, I think, is Frolic, but if you're frolicking, you add a K. So, like, frolicking is like Cking, where frolic... Yeah, I think we're agreeing. I like when this happens, when you... but yeah. So I guess, yeah, pastoralism is in the mundane, but it's pointing toward the mundane. It's a good way to put it. Some good ideas happening in this chat. Is Scarlet Violet a Pokemon game? I feel like it is. I mean, I don't know. I feel like Pokemon games are just like two colors next to each other. Platinum and Diamond or whatever. They stole my name? Oh, that's tragic. You got it from a Tori Amos song. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Tori Amos. What kind of genre is that? Also, welcome in. I should probably talk a little bit more about... Okay, so it seems like I'm the one who's not in the know here. I'm always not in the know. I feel like I'm walking through a fog of war, an ignorant haze. Like I have strips of gauze over my eyes. Yes, go listen to her. Okay. Let me write it down. I try to write these things down when people recommend me. Bam. I'll prove to you that I am. Who is it? Tori Amos. What kind of style is it? This is another recommendation I got today. Adorno, their philosopher, who's going to help me understand Kant. Diamond is a color. Okay, shut up. Shut up, Drowning Devil. It's like Pokemon. It's like thing and thing. But I was right, it sounds like. She was more popular a decade ago. Listened to her in high school. A bit like punky, feministy. You're bad with music genres? Okay. Interesting. Scarlet Violet. That's like a bleeding bruise. Like how hard? Like Riot Girl music? Cause I dig that. Or is she more like a Avril Lavigne? I'm not a role model. Used to be a runaway model. Hate the PM. Hate the AM. We're dropping bars in chat, High Caliber. I like this. But we should probably talk about Bukowski. So, we were talking a little bit about forced association. And I think this comes into play with what we were talking about, actually. Is, so, the sort of generative side, the creative side, as opposed to just observing, is basically forcing or imposing ideas onto things that like sort of don't inherently have them. And I think what we were talking about is actually a perfect example. The observer writes about the mundane, right? They write about what is there. They do not overblow it. They just let it be. They are the life of like the village person, right? Very chill. Very whatever. I should turn this ring light on. That's probably so much better. I think it's a little better. It looks better to me. So that's the mundane. Whereas the creator, the injector of thought, the forced associator, right? Forced association is this side, is sort of like the idea of pastoralism, where we glorify and overblow the beauty of what is, right? And these have different uses. They're different times. I think sometimes it's good to write about the mundane. Sometimes writing pastorally about it does not work. Sometimes you need to overblow something to make it interesting. This relates to another Bukowski poem that we read before, called The State of World Affairs from a Third Floor Window, where he talks about this extremely boring and bland day, and he waits for something literary or symphonic to happen, right? A pigeon is there too, circling, half dead with a tick of a brain, writing as if to be intentionally uninspiring. Even a girl who he would normally fiend over because he's Charles Bukowski is not interesting. Drinking beer, which he loves, is not interesting, right? And this is sort of almost a thesis saying that the world is mundane, right? And Bukowski likes to take that mundane and be a sort of pastoralist, right? He takes the mundane aspects of the city and he operates with it, uses it in the same way that, let's say, Mozart writes the Symphony No. 3 pastoral about the countryside. It's just a different setting, which maybe brings me to a term that I'm coining now, which is thoroughly, a very thorough forced association, and very contradictory, almost an oxymoron, is that Bukowski is an urban pastoralist. And I'm sure many people who actually know what any words mean and what these terms mean will yell at me and say, no, you're wrong. But that feels like basically what it comes to. Nico, Walton Mart update. You mean Walmart? Walton Mart? It's the Mart of Walton. They're funding me, and I'm going to spend that money again in store in person, grabbing with my grubby hands. Oh, yeah. You love that stylish fail? Bukowski, the urban pastoralist? I think I'm a fan of that word. I think that's pretty cool. They're the Waltons who own Walmart. Gotcha. Nico, what do you think about describing Bukowski as an urban pastoralist with no context of what we've been talking about? having a fantasy of cool happening urban life. Yeah, you don't think so, but you understand. Interesting. We can agree to disagree. You feel called out? No, I mean, no one's better at calling out shit than Nico, I feel like. As a small town queer. That's fair. And Nico, I mean that in the best way. I think you're great at calling things out. You're a big city queer, sorry. Dude, we've got the only true war that we need to fight. Big city versus small town queers. Choose your side. A schism in the queer community. Suburban queer, that's me. I'm the worst kind of queer. Ugh. I hate the suburbs. High caliber. Are you hypomanic right now? I meant I live in the middle of nowhere and I fantasize about living in a proper city again. Ah, there is an urban pastoralism there. That's true. You're a free spirit. You're a chaotic force. You're awe. Put it into some poetry, High Caliber. It's giving mania? Yeah. I mean, I think High Caliber, you've mentioned hypomania in my chat before. I'm not trying to bring that out of nowhere. I find this poem interesting because I always lived in countryside, so I've romanticized city life. Too much coffee. Okay, there we go. Yeah, yeah. And it's a different perspective, right? Being me from like more of a city. I've been in bigger cities yet, and I think I'm more on the Bukowski side, right? I've lived in functionally like San Francisco, the Bay Area. Wait, no. Okay, High Caliber. High Caliber. Story time. Caffeine pills are so dangerous. Not because of any like issue like physically. Like you can take a lot of those before it really messes you up. But those are addicting. They're like crack. So when I was in music school, I don't think we've told this story. When I was in music school, I was so dead. I was so thoughtless. I was so like burnt out on life. And then I realized one day I was with someone, I was talking, and then I drank coffee. And I'm like, dude, I feel like wired. I'm like able to talk, I'm able to do things. And I like went and practiced saxophone. It was great that day. And I'm like, wait, I should just always have caffeine and then it'll fix my problems, right? So I did this. And I'm like, wait, but coffee's expensive. Caffeine pills, I can get like 80, 200 milligram caffeine pills at CVS for $15, which is 160 shots of espresso. Maybe more like 200 shots of espresso, right? For $15. I'm like, well, that's just efficient. That's just better. You do that with weed? Not recommend. Yeah, no, I'm saying this to not recommend it to Kylie, because what happened is day one I take one. Best, most productive, like musical practicing day ever, right? I'm like on the grind, I'm progressing, like the world is great. Everything's in focus. And then it goes away, right? But the first one lasted a day. Literally day two, I take a caffeine pill in the morning, and then at 2 p.m. I tank. And I'm like, well, take another one, right? And then it only took me a week before I had a day in which I took a caffeine pill every 2 hours, 7 times, right? Which is 1.4 grams of caffeine in a day, right? It's absurd. It was absurd. And then I stopped because you have to stop. I realized, I'm like, this is messed up. And I crashed and had the most absolutely depressed, abhorrent, miserable, like, 3 days of my life. Because I was, like, in withdrawal. And not only that, but, like, withdrawal from the energy and the sort of what I thought was, like, superpowers that I had, right? Which was just caffeine messing with my head. And no, I wasn't cool. I wasn't even social because I was channeling the caffeine into like 6 hours in the practice room every day. And I have to say, in that week, I practiced all of the music for the entire semester. Like I memorized the entire like piece that I was working on for the end of the semester and like also learned something else in like a week. It was insane. Oh, I learned all my quartet music. I was wired, right? And I'm playing this saxophone quartet that's at like 160 BPM and has 30-second notes, and I could fly through those easy, right? And not easy runs. And then you crash and you die, and it's really alluring, and then you really do hurt yourself mentally. So High Caliber, please exercise caution. Please. If you're gonna do it, only do it in like the circumstances where you absolutely need, but also just don't. Just throw them away. Like, now. Please. It will be so much worse for you in, like, a week. You do with that weed? Yeah, I read that. Couldn't do that even though I wanted to. Caffeine makes me tired. That's wild to me. I once drank 12 energy drinks and fell asleep. That's wild. Had the caffeine withdrawal headache. I mean, I don't think I did. I don't remember, admittedly. I think it's that, like, the depression came rushing back in. And, like, I went back to, like, numbness, you know? It used to it really quick. Yeah, it was in the span of a week that I 7x'd my, my caffeine intake. Bad. And that was getting me to a point of, like, a dangerous dose. You are careful. You don't take them unless you don't have the coffee grounds or milk. Some days I don't even take any caffeine. Regardless, high caliber, you write very well, and I wouldn't want your art to be compromised by your intake of caffeine to a dangerous level. And I'm not saying it's at a dangerous level. You're probably fine, but it's like a slope. And just please be careful. I have to lessen my coffee intake. Anyhow, it sets off your Tourette's. Interesting. You didn't know it, neither did you. Found out the hard way. Yeah, that would probably suck. Like hyper Tourette's. Then that'd be good. So yeah. Bukowski glorifies the city. And this is really interesting, right? Because in doing so, he also does this funny little thing at the same time of glorifying. All right, class, let's see if we can do it. If he's glorifying the city in this poem, what does he thus also glorify through metaphor? We got this. For 3 days in a row, I was drinking a lot of coffee and was having a tic every few seconds. Wow. Okay, class. The question stands. What is Bukowski glorifying if he glorifies the city at the same time? This poem glorifies the city. The city is related to other things in this poem, right? What does he thus glorify? New here. I've been lurking for a while and really enjoying this. Got a dip, but I'll be back soon. Awesome. Well, Novosaurus Rex, welcome, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for joining in. If you're a writer, I'd love to see your poetry sometime down the road. We do, like, submissions, but, like, good to have you, good to see you, and have a good one. Alright, y'all. We tried. Himself? Probably not. Close, actually. A poem is a city. It's not a trick question. If he glorifies the city, he glorifies poetry. He glorifies the poem. Right? Which is something that we know Bukowski to do. The glorification of his own art. I mean, it's not a surprise, right? That you would want to glorify and put value in the art you do. But he glorifies the idea of the poem itself, right? A poem. Not this poem, but poetry. And Bukowski constantly writes about how poetry is this sort of foil to the banal life of other people and their 9 to 5, and poetry is the thing that makes the unbearable bearable, and poetry turns the unsymphonic pigeon into a very symphonic poem, right? This is what he does. Symphonic, just his word before for like artistic and grandiose. He glorifies poetry. And this is interesting, right? Because he also sometimes talks about, like, kind of not liking poetry. He says, in, like, his very first poem in this collection, do all these things, but don't write poetry. It's the poem Friendly Advice to a Lot of Young Men and a Lot of Old Men, too. If you want to see that poem, it's the first one in the playlist. Or you can look it up. But he says, you know, put a hatchet in your head, but don't write poetry, is the extent of the poem. And it shows this sort of constant, right, tension in Bukowski's work between art and beauty, but then also life and the city and all the contradiction wrapped up in being an artist. And we'll talk about that more in a second, because there's more to that. But this poem's really good. Author Brian Liu, welcome. Hey there, sorry I've been away for like a week. No need to be sorry. Drowning Devil, you were tempted to say women because it's Bukowski. I mean, in a sense he does. Whenever Bukowski is talking about poetry and booze as a good thing, he's also talking about the life of, as he sees it, the artist, and that probably involves that. But that's the connection, right? Sometimes we try to jump and make very broad connections, like oh, if he talks about the city, he's talking about like something else. No, it says a poem is a city, right? This is like the fundamental. It's not even a metaphor. It's a city. No, it's a metaphor. It is a city. It's not like a city. It is a city, right? So anything he does with the city, he speaks the same way to the poem. Anything that he says about poem, he talks about the city. Good to see you. I had to work yesterday, but my wife and stepdaughter went to Day of Remembrance event here for trans people. Love it. They're like 2 layers deep into meta. I'm a poet who's gonna write a poem about what a poem is. Yeah, and make it commentary on how we value poems. and sort of force value onto them. Interesting stuff. Thanks for listening to me and my thoughts on Bukowski. Make sure to check out the rest of the series if you enjoyed, and follow or stop by Twitch if you want to see more. See you there.